This is Henry. Henry is the first Duke of Portland. He has one of the great fortunes of England, a wife, 5 children, several enormous houses, and a dukedom which was, in the official phrasing, created largely in memory of his illustrious father, meaning that the highest rank in the English peerage was awarded to Henry as a courtesy for the achievement of being his father's son. Do hold that thought, it becomes load-bearing. And in the autumn of 1721, Henry, who 18 months earlier was one of the richest men in the kingdom, is going to flee the country to escape his creditors. He will do this in the most dignified manner ever recorded. He will have himself appointed governor of Jamaica. Yes, that was technically a legal way of escaping your debts. Well, it was once, for one man. Briefly. Now, to understand how a duke comes to use the Caribbean as a legal strategy, you must first meet the father. Hans Willem Bentinck was a Dutch nobleman with one extraordinary talent, being liked by exactly the right person. The right person was William of Orange, who in 1688 invaded England, became King William III, and began handing his oldest friend English estates on a scale that Parliament found alarming enough to complain about formally. When Hans died, Henry inherited all of it: the money, the houses, the expectations, especially the expectations. Henry, in fairness, did everything correctly. He toured Europe with his own personal historian. He married the daughter of an earl. He sat in Parliament and said very little, which was considered promising. He was, by every surviving account, agreeable, dutiful, and entirely unremarkable, which in the English aristocracy is regarded as a triumph. And in 1716 he was made the first Duke of Portland, for, and I must stress this, his father's accomplishments. Henry now had a duke's rank, a duke's houses, and a duke's expenses. What he did not quite have was a duke's income. This is the sort of gap a man notices privately, at night, with a candle and a ledger. Which brings us, inevitably, to 1720, and to a company with a plan. The South Sea Company existed, in theory, to trade with South America. In practice, it traded in something far more profitable, its own share price. And to guarantee that important people stayed enthusiastic, it lent stock to peers of the realm. Lent, you did not pay for the shares. The company simply wrote your name beside them, the price rose, and everyone became wealthy by mutual agreement. If that arrangement sounds to you like a machine specifically designed to explode, then congratulations, you have outperformed the entire House of Lords. Henry went in the way he did everything, thoroughly, respectably, and at the worst conceivable moment. Against stock worth £17,100, he borrowed £84,000. I want to be clear about the mathematics there. For every pound Henry actually held, he owed very nearly 5 more. In the summer of 1720, this made him a visionary. In September, the price collapsed, and it made him something else. The paper fortune evaporated in weeks. The borrowed money, unhelpfully, remained entirely real. And here we arrive at the special problem of the ruined aristocrat. A ruined merchant can vanish into a port town. A ruined clerk can change his name and emigrate. A duke cannot disappear. He is, structurally, the most visible object in England. He cannot take work because work is beneath him. He cannot hide because everybody knows where his houses are. The creditors knew precisely where Henry was at every moment of every day. That, after all, was the entire point of being a duke. But there was one door. An officer of the crown, serving abroad in a royal colony, was in practice beyond the reach of his creditors. Not forgiven, simply unreachable. 4,000 miles of ocean, it turns out, functions rather like a legal opinion. And so, in the autumn of 1721, the Duke of Portland requested, and was granted, the governorship of Jamaica. I do realize how this sounds. It's worth pausing on what he was actually agreeing to. Jamaica in 1721 was not a posting gentleman requested. It was among the deadliest stations in the empire, an island of hurricanes, pirates, and fevers that consumed governors at a rate the colonial office preferred not to publish. Henry knew this, everyone knew this, and he packed up his wife and his children and his household, closed up houses his father had been given by a king, and sailed for a fever island anyway, because it was the one place on earth where the family name could remain solvent. The dukedom had been created in memory of his father. Henry would spend the rest of his life paying the installments on a memory. Jamaica welcomed its new governor with characteristic warmth. Within months of his arrival, a hurricane tore across the island and flattened Port Royal, a town which had already been destroyed by an earthquake in 1692, rebuilt, badly burned, and rebuilt again. The residents of Port Royal may in fact be the only people in this story unluckier than Henry. He dug the colony out. He fought the island's assembly over revenues, a dispute of magnificent tedium which he pursued conscientiously for years. He administered hurricane relief, pirate trials and tropical bureaucracy, and he did it all, by most accounts, rather well. Nobody becomes governor of Jamaica in 1721 because things are going well, but Henry, having taken the job as a hiding place, then committed the very characteristic error of actually doing it. For 5 years it worked. The creditors circled his estates in England and found nothing they could touch. And then, in July of 1726, in Spanish Town, the island presented its invoice. A fever took him in a matter of days. He was 44 years old. The plan, it should be said, held to the very end. No creditor ever reached him. His body was shipped home to England, and in November of 1726, Henry returned to London at last, where he was buried in Westminster Abbey, among the kings, with full ducal honours. His creditors were finally in the same city as him again. It was the closest any of them ever came to being repaid. Which brings us inevitably to the question of why the Crown permitted any of this, because it was never a loophole. It was the system working. The empire needed governors for islands that killed governors, and no successful man would go. A ruined duke was the perfect appointment, grand enough to impress a colony, desperate enough to accept, and if the fevers took him, eminently replaceable by the next ruined gentleman in the queue. The company had bribed the peerage with imaginary shares. The Crown staffed its deadliest posts with the wreckage. Every institution in this story behaved with complete rational efficiency. That is the genuinely dreadful part. Nobody was mad, it all simply worked. We do still do this, incidentally. When the money goes catastrophically wrong, the men responsible tend to discover a sudden and sincere passion for distant jurisdictions. The apartment in a city with no extradition treaty. The wellness retreat with unreliable Wi-Fi. The fresh start, 4,000 miles from the auditors. We have streamlined the process considerably since 1721. It no longer requires a royal commission, merely a one-way flight and a time zone your creditors find discouraging. The main refinement is that our fugitives now select destinations with better survival rates. Henry, it must be said, achieved what they all dream of. He escaped his creditors in the most dignified manner ever recorded, permanently.